Part 1. Lauren Ashley. Lauren Ashley was 18 years old. She had just finished high school in Wayland, Massachusetts, and was standing at the edge of a new chapter. College plans were forming. New friendships were waiting. Her future felt open and light. People who knew her described her as cheerful and gentle. She loved music, spent time with friends, and stayed close to her family. In her home, Lauren was seen as the center of warmth and optimism, a young woman who believed life was moving forward. Lauren had been in a long relationship with Nathaniel Fudja. To her, the relationship had reached its natural end. She wanted space. She wanted calm. She wanted to begin the next stage of her life without emotional pressure. The decision to end the relationship was clear in her mind. It was not dramatic or cruel. It was a choice rooted in growth and self-direction. Nathaniel did not see the breakup the same way. Friends and later court records showed that he struggled deeply with the separation. He felt rejected and overwhelmed. Instead of processing those feelings openly or seeking support, he kept them inside. His emotions did not settle. They intensified. What Lauren viewed as a necessary step forward, Nathaniel experienced as a personal collapse. Lauren tried to create distance. She reduced contact and focused on moving on. She believed that time and space would help both of them adjust. There was no indication that she expected danger. She trusted that her decision would eventually be accepted, even if it was painful in the moment. One summer evening after graduation, Lauren told her father she was going out. It was a simple statement, ordinary and familiar. She did not return home that night. As hours passed, concern grew. Calls went unanswered. Messages received no reply. By morning, fear replaced hope. Authorities later discovered Lauren's body in a marshy area near Water Row in Wayland. The news stunned the town. Wayland was a quiet community where tragedies of this kind felt distant and unreal. The loss of a young woman with her life ahead of her shook families, schools, and neighbors. The image of Lauren as a smiling graduate quickly turned into a symbol of a life taken far too early. Investigators began retracing Lauren's final movements. They reviewed messages, spoke with friends, and focused on the emotional context surrounding the breakup. Attention soon turned to Nathaniel. Their recent separation, combined with witness statements about his emotional state, placed him at the center of the investigation. A search of Nathaniel's home revealed evidence that prosecutors later described as significant. Traces linking Lauren to the location were found in multiple areas of the house. Items connected to the night she disappeared were discovered concealed from view. Each finding added weight to the theory that the breakup had triggered a response rooted in anger and loss of control. The case moved to court. Prosecutors presented a narrative centered on rejection and emotional escalation. They argued that Nathaniel could not accept Lauren's decision and reacted in a moment of intense distress. The evidence, they said, showed planning and awareness rather than confusion or accident. The defense focused on Nathaniel's mental state. His lawyers spoke about emotional struggles and psychological challenges. They asked the jury to consider whether his actions were shaped by an inability to manage overwhelming feelings rather than deliberate intent. Mental health professionals were referenced, and the complexity of his inner state was placed before the court. The jury listened to both sides. They reviewed physical evidence, testimony, and timelines. In the end, they found Nathaniel guilty of first-degree murder. The judge imposed a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, the most severe punishment allowed under Massachusetts law. The ruling closed the legal chapter but did not ease the grief left behind. Lauren's parents faced a reality no family expects. Their only child was gone. The future they imagined for her vanished in a single night. Instead of withdrawing from the world, they chose a different path. They began speaking publicly about healthy relationships and emotional safety. They shared Lauren's story with students, parents, and educators, hoping that awareness could prevent another loss. They emphasized the importance of recognizing warning signs after a breakup. They spoke about control, fixation, and the refusal to respect boundaries. Their message was clear. Ending a relationship should never place someone in danger. Love does not grant ownership. Rejection does not justify harm. Years later, the case remained part of legal discussion. Appeals were filed and reviewed, including arguments related to Nathaniel's mental health at the time of the crime. Courts examined these claims carefully. The conviction stood. The legal system acknowledged the complexity of emotion but upheld responsibility for action. Lauren Ashley became more than a victim in a court record. She became a reminder of how vulnerable moments can turn dangerous when one person refuses to let go. Her story continues to be referenced in conversations about young relationships, emotional maturity, and the hidden risks that can follow a breakup. Her parents continue to honor her by focusing on prevention rather than bitterness. They encourage young people to speak up when they feel unsafe and to trust their instincts. They remind families and schools that emotional distress should never be ignored, and that support systems matter most during moments of change. Lauren's life was defined by kindness and possibility. Her death forced a community to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most dangerous moment in a relationship is not when it begins, but when it ends. What do you think could have changed the outcome of this story, and where do you believe the earliest warning sign appeared? The next case shows how a similar refusal to accept a breakup unfolded in a very different home, with consequences that were just as irreversible. Part 2, Emma Walker. Emma Walker was a high school student in Knoxville, Tennessee. She was known as energetic, friendly, and deeply involved in cheerleading. Teachers remembered her as focused and polite. Friends described her as someone who laughed easily and brought people together. At home, she was close to her parents and shared everyday routines that felt safe and familiar. Her life followed a predictable rhythm shaped by school, sports, and friendships. Emma had dated Riley Gall while they were students at the same school. At first, the relationship appeared ordinary. Over time, Emma began to feel uneasy. She sensed that the dynamic was no longer healthy for her. She felt watched rather than supported. She felt pressure where there should have been trust. After thinking carefully, she made the decision to end the relationship. Her reason was simple. She wanted peace. She wanted to feel safe. She wanted space to focus on her own life without constant emotional tension. From her perspective, the breakup was final and clear. She communicated that she did not want to continue the relationship. She believed that being honest was the right thing to do. Riley did not accept her decision. After the breakup, his behavior changed in ways that worried people around Emma. He sent repeated messages. He tried to contact her through different platforms. When communication was blocked, he found new ways to reach her. He appeared unannounced in places where she was spending time. His actions showed persistence rather than respect. Friends noticed that Emma seemed unsettled. She spoke quietly about feeling uncomfortable. She mentioned that Riley would not leave her alone. At times, she expressed guilt, as if she felt responsible for his emotional state. This reaction was important. People close to Emma later said she tried to be kind even while asking for distance, hoping the situation would calm down. The signs were there. Repeated contact. Ignoring boundaries. Emotional pressure. These behaviors did not always look dramatic on the surface, but together they formed a pattern. Emma's friends encouraged her to stay cautious. They told her to prioritize her safety. Like many young people, Emma believed that the situation would eventually fade. One early morning, everything changed. Emma was asleep in her bedroom at her family home. Her parents expected to wake her for school as usual. Instead, they found her unresponsive. The quiet routine of the morning collapsed into shock and confusion. Emergency services arrived quickly, but there was nothing that could be done. The community was stunned. News spread rapidly through the school, the neighborhood, and across the city. Emma was young, known, and deeply loved. The idea that her life could end in her own home felt impossible to process. Vigils appeared. Students gathered. Parents hugged their children more tightly. Investigators began working immediately. They examined the area around the house and the direction from which the fatal act occurred. Evidence pointed to someone who knew the home and knew Emma's routine. Attention turned toward Riley. His recent behavior after the breakup placed him under scrutiny. As the investigation continued, authorities uncovered more details. Digital messages showed fixation. Timelines revealed planning. It became clear that this was not a sudden, random act. The sequence of events showed preparation and intent rather than impulse. An unexpected development involved Riley's friends. After the incident, Riley had reached out to people he trusted. In conversations with them, he revealed actions that raised alarms. These friends chose to cooperate with investigators. Their information helped locate crucial evidence and clarified what had happened in the hours after Emma's death. The case moved to court. Prosecutors focused on the pattern that began with the breakup. They presented messages, witness testimony, and technical evidence. Their argument was direct. Emma had said no. That refusal was not respected. They described a progression from emotional attachment to obsession, and from obsession to irreversible action. The defense attempted to frame Riley as emotionally overwhelmed and immature. They suggested that his age and mental state impaired his judgment. However, the evidence showed consistency and preparation. The jury listened to days of testimony and reviewed records that outlined the timeline in detail. When the verdict was delivered, Riley was found guilty of first-degree murder under Tennessee law. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the crime. He received life imprisonment with the possibility of parole only after decades. The ruling acknowledged both the loss of a young life and the deliberate nature of the act. Emma's family faced a future defined by absence. Her room remained. Her cheer uniform remained. Her voice was gone. In the aftermath, they chose to speak publicly about warning signs in relationships. They worked with schools and community groups to help others recognize behaviors that are often dismissed or minimized. Emma's case became part of a broader conversation. It highlighted how refusal to accept rejection can escalate. It showed that danger does not always come with obvious threats. Sometimes it appears as persistence, guilt, or the inability to let go. In Knoxville and beyond, programs began emphasizing emotional boundaries and respect after breakups. Parents were encouraged to listen carefully when their children expressed discomfort. Students were taught that no explanation is owed beyond a clear no. Emma Walker is remembered not only for how she died, but for how she lived. She was a teenager building her identity, dreaming about the future, and trusting that her voice mattered. Her story remains a warning about what can happen when one person's choice is ignored. Looking back, many people ask the same question. At what point should concern turn into action, and who bears responsibility to intervene when boundaries are crossed? In the next part, the story shifts to a different relationship and a different city, where emotional collapse after a breakup led to consequences that unfolded in a matter of minutes. Part 3, Matthew Rardin. Matthew Rardin was a young emergency room nurse in Maine. He worked long shifts at Mercy Hospital in Portland, where colleagues described him as calm, patient, and deeply committed to caring for others. In a profession defined by urgency and pressure, Matthew was known for bringing steadiness. Patients remembered his voice. Co-workers remembered how he stayed late without complaint. He was building a career grounded in service and quiet professionalism. Outside the hospital, Matthew's life appeared stable. He had friends, routines, and plans. He was open about who he was and lived without secrecy. To many around him, Matthew represented a sense of balance. He gave care at work and sought normalcy at home. Matthew had been in a relationship with Patrick Milliner. Over time, the relationship reached an end. For Matthew, the separation was clear and resolved. He believed the relationship had run its course and wanted to move forward. There was no indication that he expected continued conflict. In his mind, the ending was final, even if it was painful. Patrick experienced the breakup very differently. Friends later described him as struggling to cope with the loss. While Matthew accepted the end as a necessary step, Patrick appeared unable to let go. Their emotional trajectories moved in opposite directions. One was closing a chapter. The other felt trapped inside it. In the days leading up to the incident, Patrick's behavior raised quiet concerns. His online posts reflected sadness and isolation. He shared thoughts about loss, loneliness, and feeling overwhelmed. There were no direct threats. There were no explicit warnings. What appeared instead was emotional collapse expressed in fragments and despair. Matthew continued his life. He went to work. He cared for patients. He maintained routines. There was nothing to suggest he believed he was in immediate danger. He did not seek protection. He did not change his patterns. The breakup, from his perspective, was over. One night in late autumn, Patrick went to Matthew's apartment in Westbrook. Earlier that day, Patrick had legally purchased a firearm. What happened next unfolded quickly. Inside the apartment, Matthew was shot and sustained fatal injuries. Shortly after, Patrick took his own life. When authorities arrived, they found both men near the entrance of the apartment. The scene was quiet. There were no signs of a prolonged struggle. The event was officially classified as a murder-suicide. The conclusion was based on physical evidence, timelines, and witness information. The official ruling brought clarity but not comfort. For Matthew's family, friends, and colleagues, the loss felt impossible to process. He was young. He was needed. He had spent his days protecting others, only to lose his life in a space that should have been safe. Media coverage of the case was careful but widespread. Many reports emphasized that the incident occurred within an intimate relationship. Authorities classified it as a form of domestic violence. This classification was significant. It challenged assumptions that such violence fits only one pattern or one type of relationship. The community response was marked by shock and reflection. Conversations emerged about emotional distress, mental health, and the risks that can follow a breakup. Advocacy groups pointed out that warning signs do not always appear as anger or threats. Sometimes they appear as silence, withdrawal, and hopelessness. Matthew's colleagues at Mercy Hospital struggled to return to normal routines. Empty shifts were filled. New nurses took over tasks Matthew once handled. His absence was felt not only emotionally but practically. Statements released by the hospital honored his dedication and compassion. Patients and staff shared stories of moments when Matthew made a difference during frightening emergencies. The case also prompted broader discussion. It highlighted that violence can occur in any type of relationship. Gender and orientation do not provide immunity. Emotional imbalance, fixation, and despair can escalate regardless of who is involved. Experts stressed the importance of taking emotional distress seriously, even when it does not present as outward aggression. One of the most difficult aspects of the case was the absence of clear warnings. Patrick's messages showed pain but not intent. Matthew had no reason to believe the situation would turn dangerous. This lack of obvious signals left many people questioning how such tragedies can be prevented. There were questions with no answers. Could intervention have helped? Would support or treatment have changed the outcome? Was there a moment when someone could have stepped in? These questions lingered without resolution, haunting those who remained. Matthew's family chose to remember him for how he lived rather than how he died. They focused on his kindness, his professionalism, and his dedication to helping others. Friends organized tributes. Photos were shared. Stories circulated about his humor and calm presence. In the years following his death, Matthew's name continued to surface in discussions about intimate partner harm and mental health awareness. His story became a reference point for training sessions and community talks. Not as a statistic, but as a person whose life mattered. Matthew Rardin was not defined by tragedy. He was defined by care. His story serves as a reminder that emotional pain left unaddressed can become dangerous, and that safety concerns deserve attention in every kind of relationship. Which part of this story do you think was most overlooked before it was too late, and why do you think those signs are often missed? The next case reveals how anger after rejection took a different path, leading to consequences that unfolded across an entire family rather than one household. Part 4, Angela and Rodney Gilpin. Angela Gilpin was a woman trying to restore order to her life. For a period of time, she had been involved in a secret relationship with David Hoser. The connection existed outside her marriage and carried emotional weight she could no longer manage. Angela reached a point where she wanted to stop. She wanted distance. She wanted to return fully to her role as a wife and to rebuild stability within her family. Her decision was deliberate. Angela made it clear that the relationship was over. She expressed her desire to focus on her marriage with her husband, Rodney Gilpin. Rodney was not part of the hidden relationship, but he became part of its consequences. Friends later described Angela as conflicted but firm. She believed ending the affair was the only way to regain peace. David Hoser did not respond with acceptance. Accounts later presented in court showed that he struggled intensely with the rejection. What Angela viewed as a necessary boundary, David experienced as betrayal. His emotions did not fade with time. Instead, they hardened. Anger replaced disappointment. Fixation replaced longing. Angela began to feel unsafe. She noticed changes in David's behavior that unsettled her. His reactions felt unpredictable. His presence became something she feared rather than avoided. Recognizing this shift, Angela took steps to protect herself. She filed for a protective order, a legal move that signaled serious concern. To those around her, this was a warning that the situation had escalated beyond emotional discomfort. The protective order marked a clear line. It documented Angela's fear and her attempt to create distance through legal means. It also showed that she understood the potential risk. Despite this step, the tension did not dissolve. The emotional weight of the breakup remained unresolved on David's side. One day in early autumn, the situation reached its tragic conclusion. Angela and Rodney were found inside their home in Jefferson City, Missouri. Both had been shot. The discovery stunned the community. Neighbors described the couple as quiet and private. The idea that violence could enter their home felt unreal. Investigators moved quickly. They examined the scene, gathered evidence, and reconstructed the timeline. Attention turned to David Hoser almost immediately. His connection to Angela and the recent protective order placed him at the center of the inquiry. While direct physical evidence linking him to the scene was limited, investigators uncovered other troubling details. When authorities located David, they found weapons inside his vehicle. The quantity and variety raised concern. Alongside the weapons, investigators discovered a note suggesting awareness that he was being sought. His behavior after the incident appeared deliberate rather than confused. These findings became a crucial part of the case. The absence of certain forensic links became a point of debate. There was no clear DNA evidence tying David directly to the crime scene. There were no witnesses who saw the act itself. Despite this, prosecutors argued that the surrounding circumstances painted a coherent picture. They emphasized motive, prior threats, the protective order, and David's actions before and after the deaths. The case proceeded to trial. David was initially charged in connection with both deaths. During legal proceedings, one of the charges was dismissed. The reasons were complex and tied to evidentiary standards. The remaining charge focused on Angela's death. Prosecutors argued that the evidence surrounding her killing was strong enough to support a conviction. The defense maintained David's innocence. They highlighted gaps in physical proof and questioned the interpretation of circumstantial evidence. They argued that suspicion alone was not enough. The courtroom became a space where emotion, logic, and law collided. The jury ultimately sided with the prosecution. David Hoser was found guilty in connection with Angela's death. The sentence imposed was the highest available under Missouri law. The ruling reflected the seriousness of the crime and the court's conclusion that the act was intentional. Following the conviction, David pursued appeals. Over the years, multiple legal reviews took place. Each appeal examined procedural questions and evidentiary claims. Families waited as the legal process moved slowly. Time passed, but the outcome did not change. The conviction stood. Years later, the sentence was carried out. The legal chapter closed, though the emotional impact remained. Angela's family and Rodney's loved ones continued to live with loss that could not be undone. The end of the legal process did not bring relief. It brought finality. The case left behind difficult lessons. Angela had tried to end a relationship quietly and responsibly. She had sought legal protection. She had chosen family and safety. Yet those steps were not enough to stop what followed. Her story highlighted how rejection, when combined with fixation and anger, can turn dangerous. Communities that studied the case focused on early warning signs. They spoke about the importance of taking fear seriously, especially when it leads someone to seek legal protection. They emphasized that attempts to leave or correct a situation can be the most vulnerable moments. Angela and Rodney Gilpin are remembered not for the scandal of an affair, but for the tragedy that followed its end. Their story underscores the reality that unresolved emotional attachment can ripple outward, affecting not only those directly involved but also innocent lives nearby. Looking back, many people wonder whether protective steps can ever be enough when emotional control is lost. In the next part, the story moves to a relationship marked by instability and repetition, where unresolved tension slowly built toward an outcome no one expected. Part 5, Travis Alexander. Travis Alexander was known as optimistic and driven. He worked in sales, set goals for himself, and talked openly about building a better future. Friends described him as friendly and encouraging, someone who liked to motivate others and believed effort would be rewarded. He kept an active social life and tried to balance ambition with connection. From the outside, his life looked organized and forward-facing. Travis met Jodi Arias at a work-related event. The connection formed quickly and carried intensity from the beginning. At times the relationship felt passionate and close. At other times it felt unstable. They separated and reunited repeatedly. Each return brought hope that problems had been resolved. Each separation revealed that the same tensions remained. The pattern created emotional strain. Travis began to sense that the relationship required more from him than it returned. He offered reassurance, patience, and support. In contrast, expectations placed on him grew heavier. Boundaries became difficult to maintain. When he tried to step back, the distance was short-lived. When he tried to move forward, the past pulled him back. Over time, friends noticed changes in Travis. He appeared uneasy. He spoke about feeling watched and pressured. He expressed concern that the relationship no longer felt balanced. Messages and calls continued even when he asked for space. The emotional push and pull created confusion rather than clarity. Travis wanted to focus on his plans. He was preparing for a work-related trip and discussing new possibilities in his personal life. He tried to communicate respectfully while creating distance. Those around him later said he seemed conflicted. He cared about not hurting anyone, yet he also wanted to protect his own sense of direction. A final visit took place at his home in Mesa, Arizona. The details of that day became central to the investigation that followed. What mattered most was not the specific conversation, but the emotional context surrounding it. The relationship had reached a point where one person was trying to step away while the other resisted the change. Days later, friends grew concerned when they could not reach Travis. He missed scheduled commitments. Calls went unanswered. When they went to check on him, they made a discovery that stunned everyone who knew him. Travis was found inside his home, and it was clear that something catastrophic had occurred. Authorities arrived and secured the scene. Investigators documented evidence throughout the house. They collected photographs, reviewed digital records, and examined travel details. Each element helped reconstruct the final days of Travis's life. The volume of information revealed a complex and emotionally charged timeline. Attention focused on Jodi Arias. Her statements to investigators changed over time. Inconsistencies raised questions. As evidence was compared with her accounts, gaps became more visible. Data from phones, cameras, and travel records contradicted key claims. The picture that emerged suggested planning rather than confusion. The case moved forward and drew intense public attention. Media coverage was constant. Court proceedings were followed closely by audiences across the country. The relationship itself became a subject of scrutiny, with messages and private exchanges examined in detail. For many observers, the trial raised uncomfortable questions about intimacy, control, and accountability. Prosecutors presented a narrative centered on escalation. They argued that unresolved tension and fear of separation drove the final actions. Evidence was shown to demonstrate preparation and awareness. The defense challenged interpretations and offered alternative explanations. The courtroom became a stage where personal history and legal standards collided. After months of testimony, the jury reached a verdict. Jodi Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder. The decision reflected the jury's conclusion that the act was intentional and deliberate. Later sentencing hearings addressed punishment. Ultimately, she received a life sentence. The ruling brought legal closure but did not resolve the emotional impact. For Travis's family and friends, the outcome did not restore what was lost. They remembered him as someone who wanted to grow, improve, and move forward. His death transformed him from a private individual into a public case, something none of them had anticipated. The story left behind lessons that extended beyond the courtroom. It highlighted the danger of unclear boundaries in relationships that repeatedly end and resume. It showed how imbalance can deepen over time when one person gives more while the other demands more. It emphasized that ambiguity can be risky when emotions are already unstable. Experts later pointed to the importance of recognizing patterns. Repeated breakups followed by reunions can mask unresolved issues. Constant communication after separation can feel normal until it becomes overwhelming. What begins as intensity can evolve into control when limits are not respected. Travis Alexander's life was marked by aspiration and connection. His story is often cited as a reminder that saying goodbye does not always end a relationship in the way one person expects. When boundaries remain blurred, consequences can grow quietly until they are impossible to stop. Looking back, many people ask whether clarity earlier could have changed the outcome, or whether the warning signs were visible but dismissed as relationship drama. The next part moves into a case where a breakup remained unresolved for decades, until science finally uncovered a truth that had been hidden in plain sight. Part 6, Sherry Rasmussen. Sherry Rasmussen was a young nurse in Los Angeles. She was recently married, respected at work, and known for her discipline and care. Colleagues described her as confident and organized, someone who took responsibility seriously. At home, she was building a new life with her husband, John Rutan. They were planning their future, settling into routines, and imagining stability after years of hard work. But there was a shadow that had never fully disappeared. Before marrying Sherry, John had been in a relationship with Stephanie Lazarus. The relationship had ended, yet the emotional connection on one side did not seem to close. Friends later recalled that Stephanie struggled with the idea that John had moved on. Her presence lingered quietly in the background, unspoken but felt. Sherry was aware of this history. She had mentioned to people close to her that the former partner still appeared around John's life. There were moments that made Sherry uncomfortable. A sense that the past had not fully released its grip. Still, there was no public conflict. Life continued. The marriage moved forward. One morning, everything changed. John left for work. When he returned later that day, he found Sherry dead in their home. The scene was chaotic. Furniture was disturbed. A window was broken. It appeared as though someone had forced entry. Sherry had suffered fatal injuries. The shock was immediate and overwhelming. Investigators arrived and examined the scene. From the beginning, the case was framed as a home invasion. The signs seemed to support that theory. A struggle. A break-in. The possibility of a random act. Attention focused on unknown intruders rather than people within Sherry's personal circle. The investigation followed that path. Detectives looked into criminal activity in the area. They explored theories involving burglary and outside attackers. Leads came and went. No arrests were made. Over time, the case slowed. Without a suspect or confession, it faded from urgency. Sherry's family never accepted that the truth was out of reach. They believed something had been missed. They continued to ask questions, even as years passed. The case became one of many unsolved files stored away, waiting for a moment that might never come. More than 2 decades later, that moment arrived. Cold case investigators reopened the file. Advances in forensic science had changed what was possible. Evidence that once seemed insignificant could now speak. Detectives reviewed every detail from the original investigation, including physical marks that had been overlooked. One detail stood out. A bite mark on Sherry's arm. At the time of the crime, testing methods were limited. The mark had been documented but not fully analyzed. With modern technology, it became a critical piece of evidence. Biological material preserved within the mark was tested. The results were startling. The genetic profile was female. This single fact shifted the entire case. For years, investigators had assumed the attacker was male. The early theory of a random male intruder had shaped every decision. Now, that assumption collapsed. Detectives compared the genetic profile with people connected to Sherry's life. The match led directly to Stephanie Lazarus. At the time of the crime, Stephanie was working in law enforcement. This discovery sent shock waves through everyone involved. It meant the truth had been close from the beginning, yet unseen. Investigators moved carefully. They collected a fresh sample to confirm the match. The results were conclusive. After more than 20 years, the case reopened in full. Stephanie was arrested. The news stunned the public. A former officer accused of killing a woman over a relationship long ended challenged many assumptions about trust and authority. The trial took place decades after the crime. Evidence was presented to show motive, opportunity, and planning. Prosecutors argued that jealousy and unresolved attachment had driven the act. They described how the scene had been staged to resemble a break-in, directing suspicion away from someone known to the victim. The defense questioned the reliability of old evidence and the long passage of time. They argued that memories fade and interpretations change. Still, the biological proof remained central. It could not be explained away. It placed Stephanie at the scene during the final moments of Sherry's life. The jury listened. They weighed the evidence. In the end, they returned a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the crime. Justice arrived, but late. For Sherry's family, the verdict brought answers, not relief. No outcome could return the years that had been stolen. The case sparked widespread discussion. How had the investigation gone so wrong at the start? Why were certain possibilities dismissed so quickly? Many pointed to assumptions and bias. The idea that a woman could not commit such an act. The belief that a break-in explanation was more comfortable than examining personal relationships. Law enforcement agencies studied the case closely. Training programs referenced it as an example of tunnel vision. Experts emphasized the importance of questioning initial assumptions and considering all possibilities, regardless of how unlikely they may seem. Sherry Rasmussen's story became a symbol of delayed truth. Her life had been reduced to a file number for decades, until science gave her a voice. Her case showed how technology can correct human error, but also how damaging early bias can be. She is remembered as a nurse, a wife, and a woman whose life was taken by someone who could not accept being left behind. Her name now stands for persistence, both from her family and from the slow progress of justice. When looking back, many people ask how many other cases remain unsolved because early assumptions were never challenged. In the next part, the story shifts to a relationship where a breakup ended not with silence, but with a confrontation that would divide public opinion for years to come. Part 7, Shayna Hubers. Ryan Poston was a young attorney in Kentucky. He was intelligent, disciplined, and focused on building his career. People close to him described him as structured and thoughtful, someone who valued order and independence. In his personal life, Ryan was involved in a relationship with Shayna Hubers that many later described as emotionally turbulent. The relationship was marked by tension. It moved through cycles of closeness and conflict. Messages exchanged between the two showed frequent arguments, emotional pressure, and difficulty accepting boundaries. Ryan attempted several times to end the relationship. Each attempt was met with resistance. Distance was requested, then challenged. Silence was asked for, then broken. Ryan's efforts to separate were clear. He told Shayna he wanted space. He explained that he was ready to move forward. He made plans that did not include her. Those plans became emotionally significant. On the night of the incident, Ryan was preparing to go on a date with another woman. Prosecutors later argued that this detail intensified the emotional strain already present. That evening, Shayna went to Ryan's apartment. What happened inside unfolded quickly and would later be examined in extraordinary detail. At some point during the encounter, Ryan was shot multiple times. The apartment was quiet when authorities arrived. There were no signs of forced entry. The conflict had occurred between two people who knew each other well. Shortly after the shooting, Shayna called emergency services. In the call, she said she had acted to protect herself. She claimed she feared Ryan would hurt her. This initial explanation framed the event as self-defense. Responding officers took note of her emotional state and her account of the moments leading up to the shooting. As the investigation progressed, Shayna's statements began to shift. During questioning, details changed. Certain claims did not align with physical evidence. Investigators later testified that the number of shots fired and their sequence raised questions. The scene suggested more than a single reaction in fear. It suggested time to act and react. Additional remarks made by Shayna during interrogation became central to the case. She spoke about firing extra shots so Ryan would not suffer. She described aspects of the scene in ways that prosecutors argued sounded rehearsed rather than panicked. These statements would later be replayed in court, scrutinized word by word. Investigators found no clear evidence that Ryan had attacked Shayna that night. There were no injuries consistent with a struggle on her body. The apartment did not show signs of a violent confrontation initiated by Ryan. Instead, messages and records showed a pattern of emotional conflict tied to the breakup. The case went to trial. Prosecutors presented a narrative centered on control and fear of abandonment. They argued that Shayna could not accept that Ryan was moving on. They pointed to messages expressing distress, anger, and desperation. They emphasized that the shooting occurred on a night when Ryan was preparing to see someone else. The defense maintained that Shayna truly believed she was in danger. They described her as emotionally overwhelmed and frightened. They argued that perception, not intention, mattered in a claim of self-defense. The jury listened to both sides, weighing testimony, evidence, and recorded statements. In the first trial, the jury found Shayna guilty of murder. She received a sentence of decades in prison. For many, the verdict seemed to close the case. However, the legal process was not finished. It was later discovered that one juror should not have been allowed to serve due to a prior connection that violated procedure. Because of this error, the conviction was overturned. The ruling did not declare Shayna innocent. It declared that the process had been flawed. A new trial was ordered. The case returned to court, reopening wounds for both families and reigniting public debate. The second trial took place years later. This time, prosecutors presented an even more detailed case. They re-examined messages, timelines, and forensic evidence. They emphasized that self-defense requires an immediate and unavoidable threat. They argued that the evidence did not support that standard. The defense again focused on Shayna's state of mind. They argued fear can exist without visible injuries. They asked the jury to consider how emotional pressure and prior arguments could shape perception in a critical moment. The courtroom once again became a space where law and emotion collided. After deliberation, the jury reached the same conclusion. Shayna Hubers was found guilty of murder. This time, the verdict stood. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after a significant period. The ruling represented the final word of the legal system. The case did not end the conversation. Public opinion remained divided. Some saw the verdict as a necessary acknowledgement that control and obsession can masquerade as fear. Others questioned whether emotional vulnerability had been fully understood. The debate extended beyond the courtroom into discussions about self-defense laws, gender expectations, and relationship dynamics. Advocacy groups pointed to the case when discussing how repeated boundary violations can escalate. Legal experts used it to illustrate the importance of consistent evidence in claims of self-defense. For many observers, the case highlighted how difficult it can be to separate genuine fear from a refusal to let go. Ryan Poston was remembered by family and colleagues as a man who wanted autonomy and peace. His attempts to end the relationship were documented and clear. His death forced a reckoning with how dangerous the moment of separation can become when one person feels they are losing control. Shayna Hubers became a symbol of a complex legal and emotional question. Where does fear end and control begin? How should the law interpret actions taken in emotionally charged moments? These questions continue to surface whenever the case is discussed. Looking back, many people still argue about the same point. Was there a moment when this conflict could have ended without tragedy, and how can similar situations be recognized sooner? The next part explores a case where warning signs were visible long before the end, yet still failed to stop a carefully prepared act that shocked an entire nation. Part 8, Lily James. Lily James was a young staff member at a private school in Sydney. She was in her early 20s and worked closely with students, supporting daily activities and routines. Colleagues described her as reliable, gentle, and deeply committed to her role. She arrived early, stayed organized, and treated students with patience. To those around her, Lily represented stability and kindness in a demanding school environment. Lily had been in a short relationship with a colleague named Paul Tyson. The relationship did not last long. It ended quietly, without public conflict. Lily made it clear that she wanted to step away and return her focus to work and personal growth. From her perspective, the separation was simple and final. She did not seek continued contact or emotional negotiation. Paul did not respond in the same way. After the breakup, his behavior began to shift. Instead of creating distance, he became increasingly focused on Lily's movements and routines. Investigators later described this period as one of silent escalation. There were no loud arguments. There were no public scenes. What existed instead was observation. Paul began tracking Lily's schedule. He paid attention to when she arrived at work and where she went on campus. He monitored her online presence and noted patterns in her day. These actions did not immediately appear threatening to those around him. They existed beneath the surface, unnoticed and uninterrupted. In the days leading up to the incident, Paul's behavior became more deliberate. He walked through the school grounds after hours. He checked doors and hallways. He tested access points. These movements were later reconstructed through security footage. At the time, they blended into the background of a working school. On one evening, Lily went to collect equipment from a gym area on campus. It was part of her normal routine. She had done it many times before. There was no reason for her to expect danger. According to later findings, Paul was already there. He had positioned himself in advance. Cameras installed throughout the school captured key moments. Footage showed Paul moving through corridors earlier that day. It showed him waiting. It showed how he guided Lily toward a specific area using subtle cues. These images became central to understanding what happened next. When Lily did not return home, her family became worried. Police were contacted. A search began. Officers entered the school and found her inside the building. The discovery sent shock through the community. Students, teachers, and parents struggled to understand how something so carefully hidden could happen in such a familiar place. Paul left the area shortly after. He abandoned personal items and traveled toward the coast. Authorities later found him deceased. Investigators concluded that he had taken his own life after the attack. This conclusion was based on evidence collected at the scene and surrounding locations. A coronial inquest was opened to examine the full sequence of events. The investigation relied heavily on digital records and surveillance footage. The timeline revealed planning rather than spontaneity. Experts testified that the actions showed intent formed over time. Forensic analysis confirmed the cause of Lily's death and ruled out alternative explanations. The findings supported the conclusion that the act was deliberate and prepared. The absence of prior physical harm in the relationship became a focal point of discussion. There had been no earlier reports of violence. This aspect of the case reshaped public understanding. Specialists explained that control does not always begin with visible harm. It can appear as monitoring, tracking, and an inability to accept separation. These behaviors are often minimized because they do not leave physical evidence. Yet they can signal serious risk. The response across Australia was immediate and emotional. Schools held vigils. Students wrote messages. Parents demanded answers. Media coverage focused not only on the tragedy, but on the warning signs that had gone unnoticed. Conversations expanded beyond Lily's case into broader concerns about safety after breakups. Government officials and advocacy groups addressed the issue publicly. Discussions centered on how workplaces and institutions can recognize patterns of fixation. Experts emphasized that short relationships can still lead to intense reactions when one person feels a loss of control. The coronial findings were released in stages. Each update added clarity. The public learned how technology had allowed investigators to reconstruct events with precision. Every movement, every pause, every decision was mapped. This transparency changed how the case was understood. Lily's family spoke about her life rather than the act that ended it. They described her warmth, her dedication, and her desire to help others. They asked that her name be associated with awareness rather than fear. Their focus was on prevention, not blame. The case led to renewed attention on policies around workplace safety and relationship boundaries. Training programs began incorporating lessons about non-violent control. Educational institutions reviewed security practices and reporting systems. The goal was to identify risk earlier, before silence turns into tragedy. Lily James became a symbol of a new understanding. Her story showed that danger does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits patiently. Sometimes it hides behind normal behavior. Sometimes it grows in the space left by a simple goodbye. Her legacy is found in the questions her case raised. How should society respond when control replaces connection? How can early signs be recognized without dismissing them as harmless? These questions continue to shape discussions long after the investigation ended. Lily's life was brief, but her impact was wide. She reminded a nation that safety after separation is not guaranteed, and that awareness must extend beyond visible harm. Her name is now tied to a broader effort to protect those who choose to walk away. Which moment in this story do you believe should have raised concern sooner, and why do you think it was overlooked? The next part moves to a case where anger followed closely behind a breakup, unfolding on an open road with consequences that reached far beyond one person. Part 9. Tabitha Stepple. Tabitha Stepple was trying to move forward after a breakup that had not fully settled. The relationship had ended weeks earlier, but circumstances kept their lives connected. Shared housing arrangements and unresolved emotions made distance difficult. Tabitha focused on friends and routine, believing time would ease the tension. To those close to her, she appeared determined to regain balance, even if the separation still felt unfinished. On a winter night, Tabitha joined friends at a bar in Lethbridge. The plan was simple. Spend time together before a late drive toward Calgary. Two of her friends were traveling to the airport for a holiday flight, and Tabitha decided to accompany them for company. It was an ordinary choice, shaped by friendship rather than caution. At the bar, an unexpected encounter occurred. Tabitha's former partner, Derek Jensen, arrived. Witnesses later described a brief argument. Voices were raised. Emotions surfaced. The interaction was tense but short. Derek left abruptly. To those present, it seemed like a familiar scene following a recent breakup. No one imagined it would continue beyond the parking lot. After leaving the bar, Tabitha and her friends began their drive north. The highway stretched ahead, quiet and dark. Unbeknownst to them, Derek followed. His vehicle remained behind them for miles. Investigators later determined that the pursuit was intentional and sustained. What began as anger in a crowded room turned into fixation on an open road. As the vehicles traveled along Highway 2, the distance closed. Derek accelerated. He struck the rear of their vehicle, forcing it off the road. The sudden impact created confusion and fear. In seconds, an ordinary drive became chaos. Before the group could fully understand what was happening, the situation escalated beyond recovery. Derek exited his vehicle and opened fire. The moment was brief and devastating. 3 people were struck. Tabitha and 2 of her friends lost their lives at the scene. The quiet of the highway was shattered, then returned, leaving only aftermath. 1 person survived. Shayna Conway, injured but conscious, managed to escape the vehicle. Despite her wounds, she crawled away and called emergency services. Her actions were critical. Her call provided authorities with immediate information about the location and the events that had just occurred. Her survival would later become central to understanding the timeline. When police arrived, they found Derek deceased from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Nearby, additional weapons were discovered in his possession. Investigators began reconstructing the sequence of events, relying on physical evidence, witness statements, and Shayna's account. The investigation concluded that the act was driven by anger and despair tied directly to the breakup. Derek's inability to accept the separation, combined with emotional instability, culminated in violence that unfolded within minutes. The bar encounter earlier that night was identified as a trigger, but not the cause. The cause lay in unresolved control and loss. The impact of the event extended far beyond the highway. Families in multiple provinces were affected. Parents lost children. Siblings lost brothers and sisters. Friends lost futures they had imagined together. The holiday season that followed was marked by funerals instead of reunions. Tabitha was remembered as outgoing and kind. She was described as someone who valued connection and loyalty. Her friends who died alongside her were remembered for their ambitions and close bonds. The survivor carried not only physical scars but the weight of memory. Public reaction focused on the speed with which the situation escalated. There had been no long-term planning uncovered. There were no written threats. There was only a moment where emotion overtook restraint. This aspect made the case especially unsettling. It showed how quickly ordinary situations can become irreversible. Discussions emerged about post-breakup safety and shared living arrangements. Experts pointed out that continued proximity after a separation can intensify emotions rather than calm them. The case became a reference point in conversations about recognizing danger during transitional periods. For years after, the families continued to speak about their loved ones. Memorials were held. Anniversaries were observed quietly. The highway itself became a place of reflection for those who passed through it, aware that something unthinkable had happened there. The case was remembered not only for its violence, but for its randomness. A drive to the airport. A chance encounter. A decision made in anger. These small moments aligned to create lasting devastation. It forced many to confront how fragile safety can be when emotions spiral unchecked. Tabitha Steppel's name became associated with the danger of unresolved breakups that spill into shared spaces. Her story was used in awareness campaigns emphasizing that leaving a relationship does not always end its risks immediately. The pain did not fade quickly. Years later, families still spoke of the empty seats at tables and the silence where laughter once existed. Time moved forward, but the absence remained. This case stands as a reminder that moments matter. A single choice on a dark road can alter countless lives forever. The margin between ordinary and tragic can be frighteningly thin. Which decision in this story do you believe changed everything, and how different might the outcome have been if that moment had passed? The next part turns to a case where a long history of harm followed a woman even after she left, ending in a place she believed was finally safe. Part 10, Karen Gilland and Final Consequences. Karen Gilland was a mother of 3 who had spent years trying to hold a family together while living inside fear. Her marriage was marked by repeated emotional harm and controlling behavior. Each attempt to restore calm ended the same way. Tension returned. Safety disappeared. Over time, Karen understood that staying was no longer an option if she wanted to protect her children. Leaving was not sudden. It was a decision shaped by exhaustion and concern. Karen separated and sought help from family members. With their support, she moved into a new home in Rockhampton, Queensland. The house represented distance from the past. It was meant to be a place where her children could sleep without fear and where she could begin again. Her former husband, Nigel Gilland, did not accept the separation. Records later showed that he remained fixated on the breakup. Instead of seeing it as an end, he treated it as a challenge to his control. His thoughts turned inward. Anger grew quietly. The distance Karen created did not bring peace. It intensified resentment. In the days before the incident, Nigel's behavior revealed planning. Investigators later confirmed that he prepared weapons in advance. He consumed substances before leaving his own home. These actions were not impulsive. They suggested intent formed before the final encounter. Each step taken reduced the chance of interruption. On the night of the attack, Nigel traveled to Karen's new residence. The home that was meant to be a refuge became the setting of tragedy. Karen was inside with her children. What followed unfolded quickly and violently. Emergency services were called, but the harm could not be undone. 2 of Karen's children witnessed parts of the attack. Their experience became one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. The psychological impact did not end that night. Trauma followed them forward, shaping how they understood safety, trust, and loss. Professionals later spoke about the lasting effects on children who witness harm within the family. Police arrested Nigel soon after. The investigation revealed a long pattern of control within the marriage. Prosecutors presented evidence showing that Karen had tried multiple times to leave. Each attempt had been met with pressure to return. The final separation, they argued, triggered the most dangerous response. In court, Nigel pleaded guilty to murder. The admission removed the need for a prolonged trial, but it did not reduce the weight of the crime. During sentencing, the judge spoke directly about the severity of the act. The court emphasized that Karen had taken reasonable steps to protect herself and her children. The responsibility for what happened rested solely with the person who refused to let go. Nigel received a life sentence with a lengthy minimum term before any consideration of release. The judge described the attack as planned and deliberate. The ruling acknowledged the suffering of the children and the irreversible loss of a mother. It was a legal conclusion, not a remedy. Karen's family spoke afterward about her courage. They described her as someone who tried repeatedly to choose safety, even when it was difficult. They shared memories of her devotion to her children and her determination to give them a better life. Their words carried both grief and resolve. The case resonated widely across Queensland. It reinforced a harsh truth. Leaving does not always mean danger ends. In some situations, it is the moment of greatest risk. Advocacy groups referenced Karen's story when discussing the need for stronger protection and support during separation. When viewed alongside the other cases in this series, a pattern becomes clear. Each story begins with a decision to end a relationship. Each involves a refusal to accept that decision. The details differ. The settings change. The outcomes, however, follow a similar path shaped by control, fixation, and fear of loss. Lauren wanted space to begin adulthood. Emma wanted calm and safety. Matthew wanted closure. Angela wanted to return to her family. Travis wanted clarity. Sherry wanted a future free from the past. Ryan wanted independence. Lily wanted distance. Tabitha wanted to move on. Karen wanted to protect her children. None of them chose conflict. All of them chose separation. What followed was not caused by the act of leaving. It was caused by the reaction to being left. Again and again, the danger appeared when one person treated another's autonomy as unacceptable. The warning signs were often present. Persistent contact. Monitoring. Emotional pressure. Inability to respect boundaries. These behaviors were sometimes minimized until it was too late. These cases challenge common myths. That violence always comes with loud threats. That time alone will calm things down. That love excuses intrusion. The reality shown here is quieter and more unsettling. Control can exist without shouting. Danger can grow without notice. The final message across all 10 stories is consistent. Ending a relationship is a right. It does not require permission. It does not justify retaliation. When separation is met with control, the risk shifts dramatically. The responsibility to prevent these outcomes does not rest only with individuals leaving. It rests with communities that recognize warning signs, with institutions that respond early, and with systems that protect without delay. Karen Gillan's story closes this chapter not because it is the last, but because it reflects the central truth of them all. Walking away should not cost a life. Refusing to let go is where the real danger begins. Which warning sign across these stories stood out to you the most, and why do you think it is often ignored? Take a moment to reflect on how these patterns connect, because the next video will examine what happens when early intervention finally breaks the cycle before it reaches this point.